In this episode, I'm going to share a couple of dreams and words of knowledge that came to me and how they related to an event that happened in my life and how it played out in front of me. I'm Jason, and this is the Aussie Berean. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Aussie Berean. Now today's a topic that I'm finding extremely hard to find words for. And it's not because I don't understand it or because I don't have the words, but it's because no matter which way I speak it or speak about it or even write it, some parts of this episode are going to appear to be very unloving. Now, I'm going to be talking about my dreams and some words of knowledge that were given to me that relate to the splitting of my church, which happened about 6 months ago. Now, these dreams are real. The interpretations are accurate. And regardless of what's portrayed, it was a message to me regarding a situation that I was about to be involved in. Now, I'm not using the interpretations to slur anyone's name, to discredit anyone, or even to point fingers at anyone. It's just purely to show how God communicated with me and how I completely misunderstood it right up until the moment before my church voted on who would lead them going forward. And the split that inevitably occurred as a result of that vote. Now, I'm also going to try and word it in a way that you guys as the listeners only have the same information that I had at the time. So basically, I'm not going to be giving the interpretation and putting it all together until the end. Now, some of the people involved listen to this podcast, so I've chosen to omit all names and replace them with just titles. But to the people that I'm speaking about and the rest who listen to this show who went through this as well, it will become apparent who's who pretty quickly. Now, hindsight's 20/20. And even more reason to omit specific names is because this topic in particular, dreams and visions, it tends to draw in a lot of attention and a lot of ears who don't know the story or the circumstances well and might take things out of context. So as well as the dreams themselves, there's also a couple of words of knowledge that were given to me. And they were also given to other people at the same time, kind of like a confirmation. Now, I'll also be talking about some of the behaviours of other people involved that should have been warning signs for me. But in my own ignorance or perhaps even naivety at the time, I just failed to see the significance in those behaviours. Now, the Bible tells us we will know them by their fruits, and this is something that I wasn't sensitive to at the time that this happened. I'll also relay that this is my personal experience in the situation, and it's not parts or snippets of other people's experiences or anyone else's influence. It's solely based on my own personal experience. It's what I read, it's what I saw, and it's what I heard. So without further ado, here is what was shown to me about the parties involved in the separation of the church that I attended. Now, starting at the beginning, before I came to faith, I would usually dream every night, and I could go through those dreams in really vivid detail. But after coming to faith, all of that stopped. And I stopped having dreams entirely, actually. So whenever I did have a dream and I was able to remember it in vivid detail, I wrote it down. And each of them have been relevant to a situation I was in and were either a warning or an explanation. And there's been many of them. So the church I was in had sent out an email to all the people who attend the church stating that the elders of the church had been stood down. Now, I guess it would be relevant right now to state that the church consisted of a body of 3 elders and a senior pastor, totaling 4 elders. But the senior pastor was just always referred to as the pastor, and the elders were always referred to as the elders. Now, there was also a board which consisted of those guys and a few others, and there was also like an entity or a body overseeing the church. Now, this body is not members of the church. It's just like an organization that the church is a part of. Now, the email was sent to the church the church attendees on the 2nd of December in 2022. And it stated that the senior pastor had stood down the 3 elders. Now, it came out of the blue and it was a shock. But there was warning signs when I look back on it now. Now, 6 days later, on the 8th of December on 2022, there was an email response from the elders which CC'd all of the church attendees, stating that the senior pastor did not have the authority to stand them down, as he was under a routine performance review, and that they, as the elders of the church and the former leadership, were the ones conducting that review. Now, I'm trying to be as non-descriptive as possible here because I don't believe the details affect the dreams or their relevance, but I'm going through this merely to show what little information the church attendees had at the time, and myself also, just to show that there's no bias in how my dreams were interpreted. I'd also like to note that during this period of time, I made no attempts to contact either party regarding the goings-on of the dispute, and only had the information in these emails to go off of. Now, this is before the dreams actually came. Now, it was also apparent at this time to me that one elder was speaking for the group of elders. Now, although they were in agreement between themselves, the group is basically represented by one man. So the next day, on the 9th of December in 2022, there was a response from the senior pastor which CC'd all the church attendees again, which brought up a lot of subjects. Now, notably, he was annoyed that the church attendees were CC'd in the elders' email. Now, he stated that the performance review was conducted in an unacceptable manner, and he had offered the elders to continue without their title. He stated that they had not been performing their duties as elders, which included pastoral care in homes, praying for and with people in service, attending prayer meetings. He stated that they were not supportive of leadership decisions that were previously agreed on, and that they questioned other leaders' abilities as well as key team members of the senior pastor's team, and that the senior pastor had escalated the dispute to the entity which was overseeing the church. Now, I won't be revealing the name of that entity because it's inappropriate for one and it's irrelevant. But I make mention of them because they are represented by one item in one of my dreams. Now, this email raised some questions and a few eyebrows for some people, including me. So I spent some time reading through them quite thoroughly, and pretty much all of them quite thoroughly. Now, I started asking questions and paying a little more close attention to the leadership team. And I wasn't asking questions to the elders or the senior pastor, just general questions around the church. One of those groups of people was one of the teams that I was involved with. But nothing really just seemed to add up. So the allegations didn't really match the behaviour, which had me thinking that either the allegations are wrong or that these men were really great at hiding the truth. Now, I'd personally seen these elders praying over people during service. They'd attended my house with food while I had COVID without even asking them. And if they're questioning leadership, well, that's their job as elders, right? Elders are supposed to keep the leaders accountable. Otherwise, who stops the bad behaviour that we often see on TV from leaders in great sin? Now then, on the 20th of December in 2022, an email was circulated informing everyone considered a church member by the elders that there was an annual general meeting that night for current church members, and it informed us that the historical members were no longer considered members. Now, this bothered me quite a lot, and it's where I started to realise that there was a lot more going on than we were given privilege to. And having thought that I was a member, I'd been there 2 years, I was on a welcome team, and I'd helped with maintenance of the building quite regularly. But then to not be told or even notified of this meeting for the current members, run by the senior pastor, mind you, I was rather hurt, to say the least, you know. I'd actually asked in previous years if there was a form that I could fill out for an official membership and was told that there isn't any. Basically that anyone in the church regularly, more than 3 months, was considered a member, and I was told this by the senior pastor and the church staff. So all of a sudden, I'm not considered a member anymore, you know, despite being active and serving in the church. And I do want to point out, though, that until this time, I'm unaware of which side, for lack of better terms, is in the right and which is in the wrong. And it's also starting to affect the rest of the church attendees who are now starting to sit in their own groups and take sides. Now, I was about to start my work holidays as it was less than a week until Christmas, you know, and I asked the senior pastor for a meeting. And I sat down with him for a while. And we chatted about quite a few things, you know, and didn't really discuss the dispute until probably the last 10 minutes of the conversation. And it had been quite a good conversation. It was quite enjoyable. But then the mood changed. And as he spoke, I kind of found myself agreeing with a lot of what he was saying, to be honest. You know, I asked about the church membership and the annual general meeting and why we weren't invited like in the previous year. And then he informed me that the members actually voted away their right to vote in future AGMs at the previous AGM in 2021. Now, I didn't find anything wrong with it because we actually did in fact do that, but I asked why I wasn't invited into the membership, you know, being that I was active and serving, which was now a selected few people, and it was at his discretion or choosing. You know, and then he just basically informed me that, you know, it's just to vote on accounts and balances and just really a long, boring meeting. But I was still considered a member, just not a voting member. And then he handed me a membership form. Now, towards the last few minutes, he got a bit anxious, you know, I guess from the questions I had, but I was getting a sense that he was getting a bit aggravated. Now, he'd stated that the elders were behaving like a Catholic priesthood, you know, and that's his words. And using their positions pretty much to lord over the church and block important decisions. Now, at the time, with the words he used and the way he described it, it kind of made sense. You know, it sounded right. And look, I still haven't mentioned any of the dreams yet because at this point in time, they still haven't happened. I still haven't had them. You know, but bear with me because they are coming pretty quickly. And I also want to state that when I do go through the dreams, they're not my opinions, you know, like I'm not forcing the events or people into them. You know, they're how God explained what's going on and what was about to happen to me. Now, I'm not a prophet and nor am I gifted that way. I don't have a gift of interpreting dreams either. You know, these dreams are just how God spoke to me in that situation. Now, I'm also going through this so that you have the same information that I had at the time. Now, I didn't have much more than a he said, she said situation, but I hadn't really spoken with the elders, you know, but I was about to spend a week at one of their houses because I'd booked in some work that they needed doing prior to all of this happening. But I was in prayer, you know, I was asking God for guidance because I didn't know who was telling the truth, and I just asked that he revealed to me which way he wanted me to go. And then the night before that I was due to head to the elder's house, I had this dream. And this is how I wrote it at the time. And this is on January the 3rd, 2023. People are walking sideways and stiff like a mime. Their left ear is 10 times the normal size. It's extremely large. They're shuffling downhill like on a slant. And then it splits to a huge brown bear with his back to me. He turns his head around to face me, not aggressive or roaring. He just looks at me, and he seems sad. It's almost like he's being banished. And then I woke up. Now, instantly, I knew this was to do with the elder that I was going to visit. He was the bear. He had been there for a while and was now being forced to leave. You know, he was stood down. Now, I had no idea about the people walking sideways, that only really that I didn't see their faces. You know, they were just blank with no features. And they were standing hand in hand, kind of like a daisy chain. Now, the hill that they were shuffling on was like a tunnel going underground. And I'm not going to give the interpretation here yet because I didn't have it at the time, and I want you guys to experience that feeling of not knowing and trying to work it out as the events take place. Now, after the first day of working at the elder's house, who I'll now call the bear, I was given another dream that night, and it was written down when I woke up, and I wrote it like this. On January the 4th, 2023, in an enclosure type thing, about to get into a sleeping bag with a large group of people. It's like a sleepover or a camp with the exits closed. A tiger is next door, and there's a cyclone fence separating us. He's looking for a way over, but there is none. A white box appears next to the fence about half the height, and he finds a way over. He climbs the fence and gets to our side, and he's really aggressive and starts snarling, and I woke up. Now, for my American friends, a cyclone fence is like the fence you have on an outdoor basketball court. It's thin metal wire intertwined, and you can see through it. Now, this dream, I had no idea who the tiger was. And I spent a lot of time in the weeks that followed trying to fit all different people involved in the dispute into the role of the tiger. One thing I did understand from this dream is that the people getting ready to camp is the church members. Now that I was 100% certain on in my mind from the beginning. And I knew someone was trying to devour the church. But that was obvious because there was a dispute happening, and it was obvious that somebody is the reason for that dispute. But looking back on it now, with the information I have now, it should have been obvious to me who the tiger was. And it probably will get obvious to you. Because obviously I've written all this out in hindsight, so there might even be clues in what I've written that will give it away. Now, the rest of the week at the bear's house was peaceful. It was pleasant and quite joyous, and I felt comfortable being there. It felt like family, it really did. It was really loving. I was at ease. I had no sense of unease at all. And to be honest, we didn't really discuss the church dispute at all. And in fact, every time that I tried to give cryptic questions, he just deterred them. He's really good like that. He saw right through me. Now, we did talk a lot, though, like mostly on theology, a few episodes that I was planning on doing at the time, and then some that he even suggested that I do, and it was great, When I left his house on the Friday, it was late, it was dark, and I got quite a bit of clarity on the drive home. And I just kind of felt certain where God was leading me to align myself. Now, all through January 2023, I spent my time kind of paying attention to how everyone was acting and behaving in the church. Now, I overheard conversations and comments from people, but it was all speculation and gossip, and I still had no idea on what was truth and what was just a show. Now, sometimes you can't determine someone's fruit in a split second. It takes a bit of time. Now, I tried thinking about how each of the elders could fit in as the tiger, how the senior pastor could fit in as the tiger, and even how each person on the leadership team could fit in as the tiger, because I just didn't understand it. It was consuming me. I really wanted to know who this tiger was. Now, I was praying over and over and over and just asking God to reveal to me the interpretations of them. And he actually did numerous times, but I just didn't notice them. But then I had another dream that I still to this day have no interpretation of. And this was on the 20th of January. And it says, I'm walking around with some sort of prize. I know I've won it. It's like a stick with a jug attached on the top, and it's covered with tin foil. I noticed the bear's wife standing watching something with her daughter and her son-in-law. But they're both in a blank stare, like a trance, non-interactive. Now it's night time and something is happening in the sky and I'm uninterested in it. I don't try and look at it. The bear's wife is anxious but excited when she sees me. I show her my prize, which is still covered, and then it skips to her taking me to a round, empty room. The floor is white, the walls are a dark grey, and there's a gap between the floor and the walls, but there's lights coming in from somewhere. And then she looks at me and tells me that I know what to do. It then skips to me filling up the gap with this chocolate yogo, which is a dessert custard type thing. And I was using my index finger like a silicone, like you would do when you use caulking to fill up a gap with a caulking gun. Now, the yogo dessert thing came from the prize that I'd won, and it's unwrapped and open, laying on the floor in the centre of the room, and then I woke up. Now, I believe that this one is still playing out somehow, and it might be a long haul. There was a word that also came with this dream. When I woke up, I heard Jeremiah, 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 and I'm still trying to work it out. But if anyone has an interpretation, come join the Facebook group and share your thoughts. The link is in the show notes. I have a feeling that this one will be painfully obvious when it plays out. Now then, in February the 2nd, 2023, our church was heading into a week of prayer and fasting, which I was quite excited to enter into. Now, I was serving in the church that morning, and while packing up, one of the elders was having a conversation with a leadership member, and I needed them to move so that I could cover the chairs. So I just cheekily entered into a conversation with them, and it ended up talking about my podcast. Now, the elder said that he didn't know about my podcast, even though I'd brought it to the church at its beginning. And I'd asked both the senior pastor and the bear if it was okay, and for their blessing, and was given the okay to continue it a few weeks later. So the conversation just ended abruptly, and I finished covering the chairs, and I didn't really think anything else of it. Now, basically, when I started this podcast, I did a few episodes and then stopped. And I approached the bear and the senior pastor, and I asked them if it was okay to keep doing it. So I basically was seeking their approval, even though nothing in the show represents either them or the church that I attend. Now, that night before the prayer and fasting kicked off, we had a church family gathering. The senior pastor pulled me aside privately, and he asked me to be careful with what I say to people, because what I say could be used against the church in this dispute. Now, when I asked him what I'd specifically said, he said that I had told someone or given the impression that he approved my podcast and was under his blessing, and convinced me that it wasn't the case. And I felt terrible. I was a part of this church. I was a welcome team leader, and I loved my church. I believed at the time that I had spoken out of turn, and I was disappointed in myself. The fact that I could have brought something terrible upon the church. So I entered into the week of prayer and fasting on a real spiritual low, and boy, was I unprepared for that week. I was hit extremely hard that week, but I got through it, and it's for another episode at another time, and it's not really relevant for this episode. Aside from this part, we were not prepared as a church to enter into this week properly. And to this day, I feel that we should have been made aware of the spiritual attacks that could and would come upon us. A good leader should prepare his flock. Now, after this week was finished, I started to replay the events in my mind all week. I had been playing the events in my mind all week. And I kind of was trying to play out in my mind of how this podcast was started. And you see, I did in fact start the podcast on my own. I'd gotten about 3 to 4 episodes out, and I did in fact bring it to both the bear and the senior pastor. And both of them did in fact give their approval for me to continue it. And it was agreed by all that if I was asked to stop, I would. Now, I was under the impression that it had been taken to the rest of the elders and the leadership because that's what I had asked for. So basically, when I was given the okay, I was under the impression that the elders had heard it and they'd gone, yep, we have no issue with it. And then I got the answer from the bear and the senior pastor, both individually at separate times, who said, yep, it's okay to continue on. Now, from here on, everything got really aggressive inside the church. And us as the attendees, we started getting multiple emails from each side of this dispute. Now, it really was the only information that we had to go on. I'm aware that some people may have gone and approached the elders, some people may have gone and approached the senior pastor, and at that time they may have had more information, but this is all the information that I had at the time. Now, it might all seem irrelevant, but again, I'm going to say that I'm talking about all of this to show how little information I had at the time, and that I had no way to make my dreams say what I wanted them to say. I was genuinely seeking for their interpretations. And at one point, I even thought, well, maybe they're just dreams. Maybe it was just bad pizza. But they do play out, so I'll keep going. Now, on the 6th of March, 2023, we received an email from the Bear with a letter from his lawyers stating that the senior pastor has unlawfully tried to seize control of the church, and the way in which it was done is contrary to the church's constitution. There was also an attachment from the Bear informing of us how the elders intended to proceed, as they had legal grounds to do so. The senior pastor would be asked to stand down for 3 months with full pay, with counselling, with coaching, a debriefing and reflection. But see, this is the problem when your church is no longer a church but an organisation or an association, because there's legal rules and regulations that are put into place for when disputes arise, and the law has the authority to get involved. But this email also sparked intrigue because of the fact that it's now going to the lawyers. So it also showed that under the Constitution, the senior pastor didn't really seem to have the right to do what he did in standing down the elders, but none of us were aware of what caused the initial conflict. It was all vague. Now, to get to the lawyer stage, the elders first, biblically, needed to have brought the issue to the brother, then brought 2 more, then brought it to the church. So I was disappointed in everyone involved at this time, based on the limited information that I had. I didn't feel that it had been brought to the church. I expected that this issue should have been brought to us, the members of the church. But herein lies the problems, because number one, we aren't members anymore. The only membership is a selected few that the senior pastor had offered it to. And I would later find out that the final membership list was actually still in dispute until mere hours before the church vote. Now, number 2, you can't follow the biblical direction if one party doesn't come to the table or even answer phone calls. Number 3, we still didn't know who brought the dispute to who. So did the senior pastor reprimand the elders for conduct unbecoming, or did the elders reprimand the senior pastor who was refusing accountability? And number 4, the church was an organisation overseen by another organisation. And that to me is a major problem. Now, while it might seem wise to be under the authority of a corporate body or council, it has the potential to turn the church into a business. But on the other hand, with disputes, the council can intervene for mediation or dispute resolutions. And on paper, that part sounds great. But it can be a lot messier than intended in practice, and it can veer completely away from scriptural instruction. Now, it's at this point I'm wondering if the elders have overstepped their authority or if the senior pastor is avoiding accountability. And then on the 7th of March, we received an email from the executive committee of the church stating that the 3 elders are not in alignment with the church. Now, it was set up in the first 3 paragraphs to directly attack their character. And I wish I could be more loving or come across more loving, but I need to call a spade a spade. Now remember, the information that you have here as the listeners is the same information I had at the time that this was happening. Now, they made note that the elders shouldn't have had our emails and be directly sending messages to us. That threatening legal action was not a course they believed to be biblical, and a small portion with rejoicing in the growth of the church, and that the enemy would attack when growth is happening. Now, one thing that I didn't understand is why wouldn't the elders have or be allowed to have our contact details? They were at this stage formerly leaders of this church and would be expected to have our details. There's 2 sides to every story, not just one. So based on the information I had at the time, I started to question the senior pastor, and those dreams were completely consuming my thoughts. Now then, 3 days later, we got another email from the executive committee, and it gave every attendee a chance to sign a form stating that they were members. So now we considered members months into this dispute. Now, as I was serving in the church, I started asking questions and sharing thoughts with my fellow service team members. And this for me is around the time I started to really, really pay attention to the fruit of every single person around me. Now, keep in mind, these are people who I've spent the last 2 years of my life with, intimately, inside and outside of the church. I've worked in their homes. They've worked in my homes or my house. I've shared personal things about myself with quite a few of them. And to this day, I miss them all. And I mean all dearly. And at this time, I was kind of starting to notice that one side of the dispute were very welcoming and friendly. And the other side of the dispute really felt secretive and cliquey. Now, the next day on the 11th of March 2023, the Bear sent an email notifying us, the now considered members, that they were instructed to not enter the church and worship with us. Now, this to me was the first red flag that I did actually notice. I didn't agree with this at all. The elders were never disruptive to church services. They were never impolite. They answered everyone's questions graciously and responded to the many sneers that they got with a smile and grace. Not to mention that my personal feeling is that no one should be turned away from worshipping God, nor from a church. In fact, they actually did come, and they were escorted out of the building and forced to leave, whilst I was on the service roster that week, mind you. And I'd only found out through chatter among the team that I was filling in for, and I was actually kept in the auditorium and away from the front door whilst that was happening. I do remember trying to get out of the auditorium and then getting sort of ushered back in there. I think at the time people were wondering where my loyalty lied. Even I was. Now, I did question it, and it was explained away with events that had happened that I didn't know about, but I'd only heard one side of the story. I'm not going to get into those events because they're irrelevant to this, but basically there was a lot of accusations that they were intentionally coming to disrupt the church service that day, which I don't believe was actually going to happen. Now, I was also still trying to figure out these dreams, and I started sharing them with a few more people. Funnily enough, though, the closer the people were to the leadership team that I was telling these dreams to, the less interested they were in hearing about them. Now at the end of this email was a notice of a special general meeting inviting everyone considered a member of this church to attend and vote on the following Sunday, the 19th of March of 2023. And it was run by the elders. And it was to either reinstate the elders to their position or to keep them stood down. Now, that was on a Saturday that I got that email. And I got a word from God during prayer the night before. And the word was David and Absalom. Now, I might be familiar with a lot of scripture, and I always urge you guys to read the scriptures regularly and check scripture, but I'm sad to admit that I didn't do this myself in this instance. Now, I knew Absalom was one of David's sons, but I was still trying to fit the other two elders and the senior pastor into these dreams, and it was consuming me. Nothing fit or made sense, and the information that I had, well, lack thereof rather, made it worse and completely ignored the word that I'd received. All I knew about Absalom literally was that he was one of David's sons. I didn't know anything else about him. Now, for you guys who may know the story of David and Absalom, you're probably figuring out what that word means by what I've already said in this episode. But keep listening because it gets really, really good. And the way it comes together is really, really nice. Now, then on that Sunday, the 12th of March, after the service, I was cleaning the auditorium and I looked up at the stage behind the instruments and I saw flash in my face the word Jezebel. And again, I knew about Jezebel in the Bible, but not enough to put anything together. Because once again, I didn't study up on it. I was too focused on the dreams, and I'm very, very sad to admit, but during this time, I rarely read the Bible. I was too focused on the dreams. I went into the internet and I was looking for what tigers represent, what Jezebel means. I didn't go into the scriptures. I just thought, Jezebel may be a woman so I was trying to fit a woman into the dreams, and I know how stupid it sounds, but when it comes all together, it'll be blatantly obvious, But as I said previously, I'm running you through my experience. So from this Sunday until the following Sunday, I had these dreams. I had the word David and Absalom to consider, and I had the word Jezebel to consider. And I actually threw my hands in the air, and I just said, what, I don't care. I can't be bothered with this anymore. And I just stopped thinking about the dreams entirely. This is the time when I thought, it's probably just bad pizza because nothing seems to make sense. I just started praying into reconciliation for the church, into humility, and repentance to whoever was at fault. And I just prayed for the church to be strengthened. And I really, really prayed hard the whole week. I just wanted badly for reconciliation to take place, and I believed that it would. I believe that when the voting started, we would be informed of all the circumstances around the dispute and that we could resolve it as a church, as a family. But then now comes Sunday, the 19th, which is the day of the elders' special general meeting. So after the church service, I was on the service team again because another team was short. But I had a conversation with two brothers after service who I can only describe without giving them away as on the leadership team and influential in the church. Now, I want to point out, I've intentionally refrained from using their names because one, the world doesn't need to know who they are, and number two, I respect them both. And everyone else in this episode, I respect every single person. That's why I've chosen to omit everyone's names. And while a few of these people are actually in the wrong, because there is always a wrong side and a right side, their wrong is not the point of the episode. This is not an episode to bring people to repentance or to point fingers or anything like that. This is just an episode to show how precise God is when he shows you something. And one of these characters is actually needed for that. Now, the people who are involved in this whole church split, both sides, will know who's who. But aside from them, it's just really not beneficial to anyone else. So I'd spoken to these two brothers, and they said they were going to the SGM of the elders on that afternoon, and they asked if I'd go with them. And I had people over my house for a birthday, so I wasn't going anyway, but I just informed them that I was going to stay neutral and I wouldn't be going with them. But I do, like I said, I mentioned these two because one of them was texting me that night about the previous year's AGM, because he knows, and I think I'd mentioned that I record pretty much all the events and sermons just for myself to reflect on. Like, I don't post them anywhere. They're just for myself to listen to and re-listen to and, really get as much out of them as I can. So he obviously asked me for the previous year's AGM because he wanted to check something in that. So I'd sent him that. And we were texting for quite a while. So I thought, you know what? I asked him if he had experience in dream interpretation. He said he had a little bit, so I sent him screenshots of the dreams that I'd written down. And then he called me up on the phone like 10 seconds later, and he said he actually gave me a revelation on the mimes with the large ears. So he said to me, they're hearing one side of the story. And I was like, bingo, like, wow. And it put things into a little bit of perspective. Now, he mentioned that he believed it was the elders' emails that part was referring to. and whoever listening to them was heading slowly for a fall. Now, the imagery made sense, but it just didn't fit because the bear's emails didn't really give anything away about this dispute. So then I asked him if Jezebel could be represented by a tiger, and he said no, not really, he didn't think so, but he informed me that a few people had heard the word Jezebel, and he believed that one of the elders was a Jezebel. So I asked him about the David and Absalom word, but he didn't really have any insight for that. So now I'm kind of leaning towards the senior pastor's side of the dispute and trying to fit one of the elders into the position of the tiger, because I'm still in my mind thinking that Jezebel and the tiger are related. But nothing really fit, And then I realised that I didn't actually know the other elders at all on a personal level. I'd never really had a proper conversation with them. So I started asking questions, naturally. And then someone pointed out this really key piece of insight. I told them the dreams, and I explained how I was trying to interpret them and how I was trying to fit people in and stuff. And then they said this little sentence. They said, "Why would God show you things about people you don't know?" And then it clicked. Everything in these dreams is about people I know. So that stopped me from trying to fit the other elders into it, who I knew nothing about. And, you would think it would have made it easier to interpret, but no, I still had no idea. And this was the time my wife and my two older kids went over to Sydney for a holiday. So I used that week as an opportunity to visit Connect groups all week and just basically see if I could get as much Bible study in as possible and see how everyone else was dealing with the conflict. Now, this gave me a lot of insight and pieced most of the dream together. Now, when I was at Connect groups associated with a leaning towards the elders, I felt at peace. It was calm and it was an organised atmosphere and it just felt really loving. And when I was at Connect groups leaning more towards the senior pastor, it was a feeling of not belonging. And in one instance, it actually got extremely aggressive to the point that it was uncomfortable. Now, if you don't know what a Connect group is, it's ran by one person, usually a long-serving member of the church, in their own house, with a fellowship meal and Bible study afterwards. Now, there's anywhere from 5 to 10 people there, and everyone usually brings a plate. Now, it's supposed to be a kind of discipleship thing, and in most cases it is, but just at this one Connect group particularly, it was just insanely aggressive. And, what's the trait of a tiger? It's aggression. So it seemed like God was revealing to me where to look. But at that point, I just still really didn't get it, and I was looking at the leader of that particular group as potentially being the tiger. And yes, I knew this brother particularly well. Now, around this time, we also had a guest speaker come to a Sunday service who spoke in a prophetic word over quite a few people, and one of which was the senior pastor. Now, he said that the senior pastor was in a boat on a river, and it had a fork created by a large stone. He was heading down one side while everyone else was heading the other side, and the side that he was on would be bumpy, but up ahead, the fork rejoins into the main river. He also stated that the senior pastor could not avoid this path. Now, I didn't really take much notice of it, nor really add it to the equation during the time that this was happening, but I came across it in my notes, and looking back on it now, it really kind of is relevant to these events. Now, the next emails I received were all to do with the date of the special general meeting that was to be held in the church and overseen by the governing bodies. Now, I received one on the 22nd of March from the Bear explaining what was going to happen, what to be expected, and how it was going to happen. Now, it explained that any absentee votes needed to be filled in and sent in prior to the meeting, which I'm just going to call the vote, and he also gave the results of the special general meeting that was held by the elders the week before, which had an 86% favour for them to stay in their positions. They also stated that there would be more information on the background of the dispute, as there was a lot of misinformation being thrown around, so people hearing one side of the story. It also showed us that pretty much the options that we would be voting on, and there was 3 things to vote on. So the first one was to dismiss the senior pastor and relieve him of all of his duties, to which the elders suggested we vote no. They wished to continue working with him. And then there was a vote allowing us to vote on a simple majority rules vote, to which the elders suggested we vote yes. Now, basically, this just means that if you want to have, there was 2 options. I think one of them was you needed to have 70% in favour of something for the vote to pass, or it's just a majority rules where 51% over 49 could do. And we voted yes on a majority rules. That was just a technicality on the voting. And then the third option was just a vote to decide whether the senior pastor was referred to as Party A or Party B on the day of voting. Now, the next day on the 23rd of March, we received an email from the church board showing us all the positive things that the church had grown in under the senior pastor's leadership. Now, this included that the weekly prayer had grown from 5 to 6 people a week to 40 to 50 people each week. Connect groups were established and running well, with discipleship growing. Renovations and upgrades were made to the church building. Outreach was flourishing with a weekly food drive, and a building was set up specifically for caring of the homeless. The atmosphere in the church and the office was also flourishing, with everyone working together. Now, I want to point out a few things. The board or committee had attributed all these things to the senior pastor alone and pushed that impression. Now, connect groups were already running under the elders before the senior pastor was invited into leadership. Now, as a church grows, naturally, those groups will grow as well. The homeless project building was actually ran by the Bear, and the majority of the programs coming from it were overseen by him anyway. The mention of the church office is where I drew the line, because the office was running smoothly as they were all on the side of the senior pastor and against the elders. So once the elders were out of the building, the office was all running fine because nobody was opposing the senior pastor. Simple as that. And that will become apparent in a minute when I get to the church vote. But either way, I was starting to see the meaning of the large ears on the mimes and the relating to hearing one side of the story. The elders' emails gave away no information of the dispute, and they were not actively trying to gain voters, nor trying to smear the other side's image or lift their own image. Yes, I'm aware that people were going to them, but they were still not giving out information in the mass emails. I still have all these emails available to read through as well, and I've been through them, and that is the truth. Now, I knew that as long as people were only hearing one side, they would continue to slowly head towards a fall, just as the mimes were representing. But I was hopeful that things would change when the full story came out, and I was expecting the full story to come out. Now, the next day, again, was another email from the church board, but this time telling us that there was no right way to vote. So that was a direct hit on what the elders said. You know, the elders said, we suggest you vote this way, and they've just gone, there's no right way to vote. And I know that was a very unloving tone of voice, and I'm sorry for that. Forgive me. This is just childish to me. It really, it's childish. The elders wanted to work with the senior pastor, and they asked us to vote that way. Simple as that. People were unaware. People thought that the elders wanted the senior pastor out, which wasn't the case, and that was the information that was given out to a lot of people. So a lot of people were under the impression that the elders wanted the pastor out and the pastor wanted the elders out. That's what people were under the impression of. Everyone I spoke to was under the impression of that. Now, there was also clarification on church members, who was deemed a member and who wasn't. And basically, if you've been absent longer than 3 months from the church, then under the Constitution, you were no longer considered a member. Now, let me just say that there were quite a few people who voted who were absent a lot longer than that, and their votes were counted. Now, it gave information on the structure of the vote, kind of like how it was going to be set up. There would be opening statements and a Q&A, followed by the vote, and overseen as a whole by the body that was governing the church. Oh, remember the two brothers I spoke of earlier? Well, I'd found out that they had gone to the elders' SGM with other key members of the church and caused a riot, basically, shouting things out and stirring up strife. Now, these guys are in key roles of the church, acting in the flesh, from hearing one side of the story. And as I said before, this is calling a spade a spade. It's not intentionally to cause conflict nor to be unloving, but trying to speak the truth in love. And if you guys listen to this, you know that I have nothing against you at all, and I still to this day call you brothers. Now then the church vote happened. And this is the 26th of March 2023. And there's a few things that I want to speak on before I get into it. This meeting happened at midday after the Sunday service. Now before the service I was a bit upset, and I wasn't actually going to put this in, but I think this needs to be said, because this is something personal to me, and I hope the people that I'm about to speak about hear this and understand it and really just really hear my heart. Now, I was sitting next to a brother who I've spent a lot of time with, as also my family had. And I haven't mentioned him or his family at all. Like I just said, I haven't mentioned them at all. But his family was like an extension of my own to me. And everyone from the church who listens to this podcast will know exactly who I'm talking about, because they've seen us all joined at the hip all the time. Now, he asked me what was wrong. And I said that I was worried that our friendship would be affected by the way I voted. And he looked me in the eyes and he said to me, "Jason, no matter what happens, we will always be family and our bond will not change," which settled me a little bit. But it pains me to say this. Brother, I miss you. I've tried calling and speaking to this brother multiple times and got no response. I used to hear and see this family 2 to 3 times a week, and since this vote 6 months ago, I've not seen them more than twice. Now you see, I knew which way I was going to vote. There was 3 options given to us. The elders to be stood down and the senior pastor to remain in his position. Number 2, the elders reinstated to full duties, working alongside the senior pastor. And number 3, the senior pastor to be stood down and the elders to lead the church. So basically it's either the senior pastor alone, the elders alone, or both together, which is the way that I intended to vote. Now the next couple of events that took place are when the dreams came to fruition, and then the interpretations were solidified. Now I'm going to read out these dreams again, and you guys listening will probably see the interpretation 100% accurate. Remembering as well that they were given to me early January and have taken 3 months for me to understand. Now, dream 1. People walking sideways and stiff like a mime. Their left ear is 10 times the normal size, extremely large. They're shuffling downhill like on a slant. It splits to a huge brown bear with his back to me. He turns his head around to face me, not aggressive or roaring. He just looks at me. It seems sad that he's leaving, almost like he's banished. I woke up. Dream 2. In an enclosure type thing, about to get into a sleeping bag with a large group of people. Kind of like a sleepover or a camp with exits closed. A tiger is next door. There's a cyclone fence separating us. He's looking for a way over, but there is none. A box appears next to the fence, about half the height, and he finds a way over. He climbs the fence and gets to our side, and he's really aggressive and starts snarling, and I woke up. Dream 3's not played out, but I might give it out again at the end. Now, what I do know from these dreams at this point in time, just before the voting, is this. The bear is the representative of the elders. The mimes are hearing one side of the story. The side of the story they're hearing is leading them slowly downwards. The bear will leave. The tiger is somebody that I do know well. The box is how the tiger is going to get over the fence to us. The campers are the church members. The word David and Absalom was given to another church member and was confirmation that it was indeed a word from God. The word Jezebel was given to multiple church members, again confirming it was from God. Now, if you've worked out who's who, that's fantastic, because for a moment, I still didn't know, but I did have a feeling. Maybe I didn't want to accept it, or maybe I was just naive. But after the church service, I helped set up the stage for this general meeting, this church vote, with the tables and chairs. And the tables and chairs were for the senior pastor and the bear on opposite ends, and then the representatives of the organisation that's governing the church was in the centre. And then I was given a large white sheet to place over the tables like a large tablecloth. And when I looked at it, it was literally a huge white box. Now, this is the white box from Dream 2. So the meeting starts, and I was a couple of minutes late. I nearly missed out, actually. I was chatting outside the church, and I lost track of time. But I was allowed in and told that once the doors were closed, no one could leave. And if they did, they couldn't come back in. Now, this is the camp out from Dream 2. Both parties give their opening statements and explain their intentions and what will happen if the majority vote falls in their favour. Now, the bear had briefly stated that he had mentored the senior pastor, that he'd spent a lot of time with him for discipleship, and perhaps he'd spent too much time with him, as he felt he'd neglected his own son and replaced him with the senior pastor. Now, this is relevant to the word David and Absalom. The senior pastor gave his statement and notified us that he will not work with the elders, and a majority vote for the elders working with him, still in his role as senior pastor, would be the same as voting him to leave. And all of the leadership, including committee and staff, would be leaving with him, and the church would become naught and essentially disintegrate. Now, it is essentially vote for me or I'm leaving and taking my team with me. There's no pleasant way to say it. It's literally what he had said. Now, this will raise some eyebrows, and unfortunately, where some close to this conflict might stop listening, but this took away my option that I was going to be voting. The senior pastor in that statement took one of our options away. He was manipulating the outcome as well as the voting options, as well as refusing to work with the elders, which under the Constitution that he stood by to dismiss the elders originally, he was bound to. Whichever way the church voted, he was bound in that Constitution to follow it. It was his way or the highway. He is the tiger from Dream 2, and his actions are where the word Jezebel applies. Now, before anyone leaves, okay, Jezebel is not just a sexual or an idolatrous spirit, which is how it's viewed in most of Christianity. Jezebel controlled her husband, King Ahab, behind the scenes and manipulated his every single decision. Now, what happened in this opening statement was manipulation, no matter how you try to argue it away. A spade is a spade. Essentially, right, there was a lot of people that I know personally who wanted to vote for the elders and senior pastor to be together, to be working together. So we had emails that had given us the options and showed us what the options were, and we had plenty of time to think about and prepare where we were voting, decide on where we were voting. And in a split second, that was taken away. And we were basically left with an hour to now figure out whether we wanted the elders to stay and the senior pastor to leave, or the senior pastor to stay and the elders to leave. So now we couldn't make an informed decision. We couldn't make a coherent decision. Our decision was taken away from us. Our choice was taken away from us. It was either me or them. And that's not what most of us wanted to vote on. Now, the fact that he had stated he was going to be taking everybody with him, it kind of revealed that the current leadership teams, including the office staff, the financiers, the board, The team leaders and the youth leaders and many more were all prepared to leave the church with the senior pastor, even if a vote was given to keep the senior pastor and reinstate the elders, which was the very vote that I was intending to vote. Many of those people, the leaders, the financiers, the staff, many of those people that I'd spoken to, they didn't even know the elder side of the story. They'd only heard the senior pastor. Because when I was talking to them about the whole conflict, I only ever heard the senior pastor's side coming from them. They were following this man without a full picture. And this is the mimes from dream one. So putting these dreams into one, right? Both of these dreams into one. The leadership team only heard the senior pastor's side of the conflict and aligned themselves with him. When the elders were stood down by the senior pastor, he had the support of the leadership because of that fact. Now, the church was now ready to be taken over, just as Absalom did to David for a short time. But the only way that it was possible was through the governing body overseeing the church, who made it possible for the tiger to seize the church. It was all done through manipulation, much the same as Jezebel did with Ahab. Now, before people get up in arms over all of that, I'm not, and I repeat, not saying that it was intentionally done or premeditated by the tiger. Merely that it's just how it played out. Because I genuinely believe that the tiger himself believed that he was in the right and he was being attacked. And I also believe that the bear representing the elders also felt that way. I don't personally believe that it was premeditated nor a plan to take over, as some people have suggested since it's happened. All these men, I believe, are godly men trying to work out their walks with God. And quite often, we walk in the flesh without realizing it. Now, this is an unfortunate set of circumstances that has affected a lot of people. But I, for one, will keep giving grace as the Lord has done with me, but without denying or compromising the truth. Now, I'm trying to speak the truth in love, and forgive me if I have spoken out of turn. When it comes to rebuking, reproving, or correction, nobody is exempt. Now, Jeremiah was a nobody in his time, but he was rebuking the kings of his time, not just chief priests, but kings. Now, the lowliest of children can and does have every right to correct the most senior of leaders if no one else has the gall to do so. Think about Deborah and Gideon. Every single person is accountable. Now, as I've said all throughout this episode so far, this is my personal experience, my observations and knowledge. And there's quite a lot that I'm not privy to. And the point of the episode is to show you how precise God is when he speaks to you, even when you don't have all the story or aren't aware of what's happening behind closed doors. Now, why it was me who was shown this, I don't know. Perhaps just because I have an outlet to speak about on it. Now, should I have brought both of these dreams directly to the senior pastor when I had them? Perhaps. He could have made more sense of it than I did. Or he could have just denied and said, no, they're just dreams. Who knows? It's time past now. But after all that was said and done, and I understood what all of it meant, I realized the mistakes that I'd made. Now, the word that I got, David and Absalom, should have been a dead giveaway. And if I had have realized that that was talking about the bear and the tiger, or the elder and the senior pastor, I could have gone to both of them with these dreams and with that word, And I also could have gone back and read the scriptures about them, and I should have done. Looking back now, had the elders been in the wrong, I probably would have gotten the word Saul and David instead of David and Absalom, indicating that the old was passing away. And this is one of the many reasons that I eventually followed the bear over to the church, to his new church, much later than I probably should have. Now, when I got the word Jezebel, I should have looked into that as well. And I would have known that it meant manipulation, not a woman or something sexual. I would have then looked at the emails a little bit closer, the reprimand about the podcast and the members list and the decision to remove the elders to begin with, and probably see a bit of manipulation. But to be honest, I just didn't really want to believe that the tiger was the person that these dreams and these words were about. God speaks to us in a multitude of ways. Some through dreams, some through visions, some through impressions, and some people hear a voice. But when God's speaking, we need to pay attention. I've since been paying a lot more attention and trying to be alert to him speaking to me when he does. And it's been difficult to discern. I'll be the first to admit that. I'm not an expert, I'm just a house painter. I don't have a gift of dream interpretation. In this situation, I didn't even understand it until it was happening. And some of it wasn't until after it had happened. But what he was saying should have been evident to me to begin with. One thing I would like to speak on is this. If you were given a prophetic dream for any purpose, don't consult the internet for the meanings of the symbolism. Now, whilst the tiger in my dream represented one thing, a person in this case, in yours, it can mean something completely different. There is no one-size-fits-all kind of thing. God will use things that have meaning to you to relay a message that's relevant to just you. Now, I do also want to say, just to be careful. In this instance and a few others I've had, God was speaking to me about events directly relating to me. But I have had times in the past where I've remembered a dream with complete detail, right down to smells and colours, and they meant absolutely nothing. They were just dreams. We need to learn how to discern between God, our flesh, and the devil, because each of those factors can play a role. I've also, unfortunately, just watched someone that I'm close to also get a prophetic vision that he believed was confirmation to show his righteous living over his family, and it boosted his ego and pride, and it's led him to a fall. He missed the warnings that was coming to him that many of us tried to warn him about. And my heart goes out to him, and he knows I'll be there for anything that he asks. We can get very prideful very quickly. Not everyone hears from God like this, and you can very quickly get a sense of importance where you needed humility and miss the message entirely. Now, I could have used these dreams to come out pointing fingers at people and belittle them and tell them to humble themselves and ridicule them and, you need to repent. But how does it help anyone? Am I special? I don't think so. I was just available and ready to listen. And I sincerely hope that this episode has not given the impression of any of the characters. Not given the impression that they are prideful or anything like that. That's not the intention of this episode. This is just an episode to show how precise God was. Forget about the characters for a minute. Think about the symbolism and just how it all played out and worked in together. Now, God is real and he speaks. He doesn't want to see us fall or perish, but if we don't heed his words and warnings, or even worse, rebel, Scripture tells us in Hebrews 10:31 that it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Now, that's all I've prepared for this episode. And of course, I did say, didn't I, that I would repeat the third dream at the end of this, because I am looking for an interpretation. So I'm going to scroll back up because I didn't actually write it in here. So, okay, dream 3. This is a dream that I am looking for an interpretation of. Okay, I'm walking around with some sort of prize and I know that I've won it. It's like a stick with a jug attached on top and it's covered with tinfoil. I notice the bear's wife standing watching something with her daughter and her son-in-law, but they're both in a blank stare, the daughter and son-in-law, like a trance, non-interactive. It's nighttime and something is happening in the sky, but I'm uninterested in it. I don't try to look at it at all. The bear's wife is anxious but excited when she sees me. I show her my prize, which is still covered in the tinfoil. Now it skips to her taking me to a round empty room. The floor is white, the walls are a dark grey, and there's a gap between the floor and the walls. There's light coming in from somewhere. She tells me that I know what to do. It then skips to me filling up the gap with a chocolate yogo, which is a dessert custard type thing, using my index finger like you would do with silicone from a corking gun, filling in the gap. Now, the chocolate yogo came from the prize that I won, which is unwrapped and open, laying on the floor in the centre of the room. And then I woke up. Now that's all I've prepared for this episode, guys and girls. And of course, when and if this third dream does come to fruition, I'll probably do an episode on that one as well. Now, if anybody has any insight on it, join the new Facebook group, which is linked in the show notes, and come and share your thoughts with us. At the moment, there's only 14 people in there. I would like to grow it. I would not like it to grow to 100 people in an instant, but hey, if it happens, it happens. I would like it to grow slowly, please. If you don't like Facebook, you don't want to go there, then just send me an email at theaussieberean@gmail.com, which is also linked in the show notes. And for now, God bless you guys, and thank you for listening. And I will see you on the next episode, God willing. Catch us later.